Hello and welcome to a video tutorial from matthawkins.co.uk. In this tutorial I'll show you how to convert a DVD to MP4 video using the free application Handbrake version 0.9.5. Handbrake is a free application, it's a video transcoder and it's available for Mac, Linux and Windows machines. You can pick it up from the Handbrake website, which is handbrake.fr, and if you go to the download page you'll be able to find an installer for your specific system. It's also worth taking a look at the user manual page, as this explains in a bit more detail lots of the settings that you'll find in the Handbrake interface. It's definitely worth taking a look at the quick guide to the Windows or Mac GUIs, and also worth taking a look at the frequently asked questions. As you'll see when we run Handbrake, it's got some built-in presets, and these presets are explained, albeit briefly, on this page here, so that's worth taking a look at as well. Now, the main thing to remember when attempting to use Handbrake is that it can only read unencrypted DVD files. But that means if you've got a disk that's got any sort of copy protection on it, Handbrake cannot read that disk. That means you've either got to give it a disk that's got no protection on it, or you've got to rip that disk to your hard drive first before you get Handbrake to encode those files. So you will probably need some sort of DVD ripper. I can recommend DVDFab HD decryptor. I've already got a tutorial on how to use this on my channel, so take a look at that. DVDFab HD decryptor is free, so you can download and use that to rip DVDs to your hard drive, which will then be readable in Handbrake. So head over to handbrake.fr, go to the download page and download a suitable installer, install it, and then you'll be ready to run the application. So here's the Handbrake interface. First thing I'm going to do is go into Tools and Options to have a quick look at the settings available. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory. One thing to probably set is the location where you want your output files to end up. So just click the Browse button and set directory. If you've got VLC installed, you can specify the installation directory here, and that will enable the preview facility to operate if you want to use VLC. I generally have this tick box ticked to stop the system sleeping while it's encoding, and I also check this to put a copy of the encode logs in the same location as the encoded video, as that can sometimes be useful. And there's nothing in there I change, so just leave those on the default. So that's close. So the first step is to select your source video, which you can do by clicking the source button here. And you can either select an individual video or you can select a folder. Now I'm going to select folder, and I'm going to browse to a suitable folder. And I'm going to choose this video TS folder, which is a DVD format folder that I've ripped using DVDFab. That's now going to load that folder, and it's examined the titles that are available on that DVD, and there's 6 of them here. The longest one is 30 minutes, so that's been selected as a default. These are then slightly shorter. Now I'm going to select this one here that's 3 minutes 54. And what it does is it tells me how many chapters are in that particular title, and there's 21. Now what you can do is, if you wanted to only encode the first 5, you could do this. Or if you only wanted to encode the 3rd chapter, you can do this. So you can selectively encode parts of that title. You can also select portions of it by seconds and frames. I'm going to leave it on 1 to 21 so it'll do the whole video. It's already got the correct destination for me. If it hasn't, you can click the Browse button here and select a new location for the output. Now, the next decision you've got to make is what container to use, whether to use an MP4 file or an MKV file. Now, a container is the file that's going to contain the video and audio streams that will be encoded using a particular codec, and Handbrake gives you the choice of either the MP4 container or the MKV container. Which one you choose really depends on what file you want out the other end and exactly where you're going to play it. Different hardware, different players will play MP4, MKV. It just depends what hardware you're attempting to use. For this tutorial I'm going to choose MP4. These checkboxes here, if you don't need to use them, you can probably ignore them. This large file size one just enables you to go over the 4 GB limit. However, some players, some hardware won't play files that are that big, so you really only ever need to use this if you specifically want a file that's over 4 GB and you're comfortable that your player will handle it. Again, there's bits and pieces on these checkboxes here and why you might use them. Again, check the user manual if you need any further details on when to use those. Now, what you'll notice here is I've chosen MP4. It's given me an extension of M4V. M4V and MP4 are exactly the same. Now, QuickTime tends to prefer the M4V extension. Other players prefer the MP4 extension. They're completely the same. So when the file's encoded, you can change the extension to MP4 or M4V. It doesn't matter. You just may need to do it for some players, like QuickTime, for example, won't often recognise the file unless it's specifically got the M4V extension. So that's just something to bear in mind when you've got your final file. Now that you've set up all the details up here, the next thing to take a look at is the presets. Now the presets contain a number of predefined settings for particular hardware and particular players. You can see here there's a lot of Apple products here. Now, for doing a DVD to play back on a media center, for example, I'm just going to use the high profile setting. And what that does is that'll pre-configure some of the settings on these settings tabs here. There's a normal one, and as I said, various presets here for different hardware. What preset you choose depends entirely on what you intend to do with the video file once you've created it. For me, I just tend to create video files to play back on my media center, so I tend to use the high profile preset. I don't actually own any Apple stuff, so I've never used any of these Apple presets here, but obviously if you've got an iPhone 4, I'm guessing you use that one, and iPod Touch, etc. So I'm going to set that on high profile. One thing to note is if you change the source or you change the title, I think you need to reselect the preset just to make sure it ends up with the correct settings. That's why I tend to configure this area first and then choose a preset from this list. So once you've chosen a preset, you can move over to the settings tabs here, the first of which is the picture tab. Now what this should do is confirm the dimensions of your source video. Now because I'm using a PAL DVD, my source dimensions are 720 by 576. Yours may be different. If you're using an NTSC DVD, then this vertical resolution may well be 480. Now these settings here can be a little bit confusing. It is worth reading the user manual to read up about anamorphic settings. What I tend to do is leave that on loose, and what that allows the encoder to do is to make sure that it encodes with a vertical dimension that's divisible by 16, which makes the encoder a bit more efficient. And what these settings attempt to do is to maintain the original aspect ratio of the DVD picture, while allowing the encoder a little bit of room for manoeuvre to make it as efficient as possible. If you want to read all about what anamorphic means and what it means for video and video encoding, then check out the user manual, because there's quite a good page that goes into it in a lot of detail. Now what I'm going to go to is video filters. I'm going to leave these on the default. Again, these are all talked about in the user manual, so if you want to know exactly why you might want to change these, then go ahead. Under video, this is where you can actually choose the video encodec to use. Bearing in mind MP4 is just a container at this stage. Now you've got a choice of MPEG-4, which is actually MPEG-4 Part 2 of the specification, or you can choose H.264, which is still actually MPEG-4, but it's Part 10 of the specification. Now, which one you choose is really going to depend which one you want to choose, and that's going to depend on where exactly you expect to play back the file. So before you choose a video codec, make sure that the device or the player you intend to use the video on actually supports that codec. I'm going to leave the frame rate the same as the source. If you need to, you can obviously choose one of these, but in general I guess you're going to leave that same as the source. Now, one of the most important settings to get right is the quality setting here. You've got three options. You can either set a target size where you tell the encoder that you want the final video to be a particular size, say 2 GB, and the encoder will do its best to meet that size. Now, this isn't perfect if it's encoding in this mode. There's various things that can mean that it actually misses that number, and so I wouldn't recommend using it, and in the user manual it pretty much says that this is an old way of doing things and to not bother using this setting, although it does have a certain attraction, because obviously if you wanted the file to fit on a DVD, you would you'd be able to set a particular size. Average bitrate means you can actually specify a bitrate for the video and it will just use that to encode. So if you know specifically what bitrate you need, you can specify that. However, you've got to make sure you provide enough bits to cope with, the resolution of your video and the frame rate you're expecting. What I'd recommend in most cases is to use constant quality. What this does is you set a quality value, and the encoder will basically maintain that quality as it encodes through the video, and it will use whatever bits it needs. So the video, you can't really predict how big the video is going to be. It will come out at a certain rate, but you will know that it's of a sufficient quality. Now, for DVD sort of standard definition sources, the Handbrake team recommends a value of 20 here. And on this slider, basically a smaller number is better, basically. But they recommend using 20. For high definition stuff, Blu-ray rips, etc., then they recommend a value of 22. And because I'm using a DVD here, I'm going to leave it on 20. You can experiment. Just remember that lowering this to a much lower number is probably just going to result in a bigger file. You probably wouldn't perceive any difference in quality. So I'd recommend leaving it on 20 unless you've got a good reason to change it. The next tab is the audio tab, and this determines how your audio tracks are encoded. Now, because I've selected the high profile preset, what it's done is it's created me two output tracks. They're all based on the same input track, which is just a standard 2-channel stereo soundtrack. And what it's doing is it's using slightly different settings, and these are determined in the preset. So what it's doing here is it's creating an AAC compressed audio track at 160 kilobits per second, but it's also creating a raw copy AC3 pass-through, and it's doing this to basically increase compatibility with different players. If they don't like the AC3 pass-through, they can use this one, and vice versa. Now, if you use some of these other presets, it may just give you one output track, and that's fine. And what you can do is, if you adjust these, you can actually change the settings. So if you want to change the bit rate, for example, you can adjust that up. It just depends on your preferences. Similarly here, if you want to add another soundtrack, you can, because these containers, MP4 or MKV, can contain multiple soundtracks, and usually in the player you can select what soundtrack to use. So you could add an MP3 encoded soundtrack as well. So it's just up to you, and you can remove them. So these two are created by default because of the preset, and that's probably fine for most people. On this DVD there is only 2-channel. Obviously you would probably get some surround options if you used another DVD disc. So anyway, that's where you set up your soundtrack options. The next tab is the subtitles tab, and this is where you can decide whether or not you bring forward any subtitles you may have in the DVD. You're best off reading the user manual for this, because there's lots of options to configure depending on exactly how you want your subtitles to appear and exactly where the subtitles are coming from. So I'm not going to say any more about this tab. On the chapters tab you can choose to create chapter markers, and you can actually name those markers as required. And under the advanced tab is a lot of the settings related to the codec you've chosen, in our case H.264. Now with these settings you're best off leaving them as they stand. Unless you really understand what you're doing, it's not worth changing any of these. Obviously if you want to go into the user manual etc and read up on it, then you might want to experiment with these, but configuring these settings is a little bit of a black art, so I'd suggest leaving them as they stand unless you've got a good reason for changing them. These settings are changed depending on what preset you use, so as long as you've chosen a sensible starting point, you shouldn't really have to worry about those at all. So there are our settings. If you happen to change these presets like this while you're configuring these settings, for example here you'll see it change the audio settings, it may overwrite any changes you made. So if you made any changes to the audio, for example, changing these presets will put the settings back. So if you do play around with these presets, for example if you were looking at the difference between the normal preset and the high profile preset, just remember to always select the preset you want to actually encode with last, and just quickly double check that all these settings are as you intended. So it's the correct codec, your audio tracks are correct, etc. Just to make sure that you don't accidentally change any of your settings before you're ready. Now once you've made all these settings, one thing you can do is a preview. Now if you click preview, it'll bring up this little toolbar here, and you can choose a duration for it to encode. Obviously the shorter the duration, the quicker it will be, and you can choose what player to use. Now obviously in the options, if you've got VLC installed, in the options you can tell it where that's installed, and that's why it needs to know, so that when you click this button it'll know what to launch. Or if you've got QuickTime installed, you can use that. So I'm going to click play with QuickTime. It will now encode 5 seconds of the video with all the settings I've selected, and obviously this will take a various amount of time depending on how big your video is. Obviously I've deliberately chosen a short video just to speed this process up, and I've also set this to 5 seconds. And this preview is worth doing just to give yourself a bit of a sanity check that you haven't made any major mistakes. And then what it should do is bring up this window, and you can click the play button to play the video like that. And that just gives you at least some confidence that it's working properly. Obviously realistically you perhaps want to choose a slightly longer duration so you get a bit more of a meaningful playback of your video. So once you've done your preview and you're happy, you can do two things. You can start the encode, or you can add it to a queue. If you add it to the queue, you can then go on and reconfigure your next encode and add that to the queue. And then obviously you can build up a queue and then process the whole queue. If you click show queue, it will show you what's in there. And imagining we had a number of jobs listed here, you can click encode and it will run through and do the whole lot. Now you might want to do that if you've loaded in a DVD that's got a number of titles and you want to encode every single one of them. There might be episodes or something like that. You would load each title, configure your settings, including an output name, add to queue, choose the next title, configure your settings, most importantly changing the name. If you don't change the name, it will just get constantly overwritten. Build up a queue of files, and then you would click encode and it would process the whole thing. In this case, I've just got one file to process, so I'm just going to click start. Now what you'll see is that goes red, and in the status bar down here it gives me some statistics about the encoding. So it tells me how far through we are and what the time remaining is. So on my PC, although that's a 4-minute title there, it's telling me it's going to take about 8 or 9 minutes. So what you do is just leave that running and go and make a cup of tea. So the encoding's finished, as indicated by the message down here, and what you can do now is go to your output directory, and you can see it's created the M4V file here. Now if necessary, depending on your player, you can change that to an MP4 extension if you need to, or the M4V extension, they're interchangeable. And also here it's created the log file, and if you fire this up in a text editor, it will show you all the technical information it used to encode that video. So it will show the preset we used with the various parameters, and if you look closely, what you'll see here is the parameter that created the 2 audio tracks. One was set to Dolby Pro Logic 2 and one was set to auto, one was set to use AAC, and one was set to simply make a direct copy of the AC3. And this -B shows that we used 160 kilobits per second as a bit rate, and the other one, the second one, was set to auto. So you can have a look through here and you'll see various bits of information that you should recognise. The other thing to note is that was the source dimensions, which had an aspect ratio of 4:3, and what it does is it respects those dimensions and then sets the pixel aspect ratio to a suitable value. So although the actual pixels present in the source is 720 by 576, there's a flag set somewhere that will actually mean that that is displayed slightly differently in the player, so it's the correct shape. Now this video wasn't widescreen, so it wasn't 16:9. If it was 16:9, the dimensions would have, the source dimensions would have actually been the same, but this pixel aspect ratio would have been set to 16:9. So on DVD, the source resolution is nearly always the same, but it's this flag here that determines what shape is displayed by your TV or your media player. You can see the audio track information here, and there's various other bits and pieces about the encoding here. Sometimes useful, depends how interested you are in these numbers. This log is useful if you ever need to post anything on the Handbrake forum with regard to your encoding, because they'll usually ask for this sort of information. And what you can do with your final video is obviously you can fire it up in a media player of your choice. And there we go, that appears to have encoded okay. And what you can do with Handbrake here is obviously you can go in and add additional encodes, add stuff to the queue, and carry on, perhaps encoding the same video to different formats for different devices. One other thing you may want to look at is under options, under system, is set the priority level. If you want to give the Handbrake encoding process slightly more priority on your system, I think by default it's set to below normal. If you want to give it a bit of a boost, you might want to set it to high, although it would obviously take away processing power from your applications you may be running at the same time. So if you're going to go and leave the PC unattended, you might want to set that to high. And that's it. That's how you encode a DVD to MP4 or MKV in Handbrake. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please remember to click the like button and to share it with your friends on your favourite social networking sites. Thank you.